Thank you, Diane. Can you hear me? Yeah. My name's Hunter Saggar. I'm the CEO at Mind Forward. I would like to introduce Mike and my two colleagues that are going to present, Mike and Dr. Seyone, both with over 20 years of ABI experience. Dr. Seyone, more than that, and he also is considered a pioneer in ABI work. Dr. Seyone, also, we are very lucky to say he is the head of our clinical services at Mind Forward, so we're pleased to be able to consult with him when we need him. It's fantastic to have these two individuals as part of Mind Forward. I've been there about 2 years. My background is actually administration. I spent 37 years with the provincial government. My last 10 years I spent as the CAO for Ontario Place. So you're probably wondering, what are we doing listening to this guy, right? So they are the encyclopedias of ABI, where I might be the pamphlet. So just take that in mind as we go along. Last year, I was at the ABI conference, or the OBIA conference in Niagara Falls, and I ran into Diane, and we started chatting, and I started telling her a bit about my background, and she was quite amused by the fact that, I didn't know a lot about ABI, and here I was. But my background, as I said, was, administration. When I got into Mind Forward, I started to understand, about the staff and the services that we delivered, and it was inevitable that I would land at this place where I could see the compassion that was provided by the staff and what they did for the clients. Then later I met the caregivers, and now 2 years down the road, I actually understand compassion fatigue, which it's unfortunate, but it is part of what happens. This session today, we're going to share with you our model for addressing compassion fatigue. It really centers around two types of people. One is the caregivers, which often are siblings, parents, or other family members, friends, and community partners who support the clients every day. And when we use the word caregiving context, caregiving is across the entire spectrum of our jobs. And sorry, I'm going backwards. No, going forward. Well, I'm not sure. I'm not sure how this is working backwards. Okay, I'm going to forget that. I'm just going to go with this. Caregiving is a rarely a short-term assignment. It can go from years to decades of commitment and support. Caregiving manages, complex physical, cognitive, and emotional needs while navigating fragmented support systems, which I'm sure you all know about because you're probably working with them. Caregiving can be complex and prolonged without an endpoint or a recovery timeline. There's chronic emotional demand put on caregivers, and it actually builds invisibly, regardless of whatever condition is being managed. Lastly, as Dr. Piemonte said, compassion fatigue is not a personal failure. It is actually a system not working properly. And we need to remember that. Caregivers, as we use them in a very broad sense, are various types of people: family caregivers, housing and residential providers, clinical and healthcare partners, paid community staff, program facilitators, advocacy and legal collaborators. All are part of the entire system that we work with, and we call them all caregivers. And also today, first responders, which I should add in there. So today I'd like to thank Gluckstein Law for recognizing and giving us an opportunity to talk to you about our approach. Now I'd like to invite Dr. Seyone up to just say his part on this.
Thank you. Don't look at that picture. I mean, it just shows that I'm burnt out and my beard is kind of shortening and my hair is kind of falling off, right? So anyway, I've been, like Dan mentioned, I've been doing this for more than 30 years now. I've been a physician for about 41 years now. And I've been doing brain injury for about 35 years of that. And so I've basically seen everything to do with brain injuries, and it's a complex field. And I'll talk a little bit about how caregiving actually and caregiver burnout actually happens in people with brain injuries and caregivers of brain injured patients. So let me see which is forward here. Just to kind of add one thing before I kind of go with the slides, Dr. Piemonte said that one of the reasons that all of us get into medicine is that we think that we can fix things. We can, in some way, find solutions to all of our patients' problems. That's probably what I thought about 42 years ago, right? From about 41 years ago, I have been thinking differently. And about the last 30 years, I've basically been saying that I can't fix anything, right? Basically because, especially in people with brain injuries, there is no easy solution. The problems are impossible to fix, and the problems are kind of complex because each person is complex and the problems are complex. So it's not just fixing one issue with depression. It's fixing depression and all the other issues that kind of become comorbid with that, including patients' housing, their finances, all of that actually play a role. And so how do you fix all of these things? You can't, right? And that then leads to you having a sense, me as a person, and me as the staff at Mind Forward or anywhere else, feeling totally futile because they're not able to find those solutions. And that futility then leads to the caregiver burnout and all of the issues that we have with compassion fatigue, right? Another thing is that compassion fatigue is not the same as burnout. Burnout is a different condition entirely, right? Burnout can lead to compassion fatigue, but compassion fatigue can occur without burnout happening, right? And the other way around doesn't usually work as well because there is specific, all right, we have passed this. There are specific reasons for burnout. Burnout is usually related to an employment or kind of some sort of activity that you're doing. And that then leads to the burnout because you find that that particular activity is becoming more and more stressful. But if you go out of that area, that kind of burnout area, you're generally kind of functioning a lot better. Whereas compassion fatigue, on the other hand, can happen anyway, without you having to work, without you kind of doing any work whatsoever. But it can happen as a standalone condition. So just to talk about what compassion is, first of all, compassion is an authentic compassion as opposed to being polite or nice. It's a complex neuropsychological process that is related. I can't read that. That is related. That's my eyesight going actually, but by everything else. It's a complex neuropsychological process that is related to frontal lobe executive function, the most recently developed and most complex of cognitive processes. To engage in compassion, you have to be cognitively present, understand one's social surroundings, and be aware of one's impact on others. So you need to know what compassion is before you can actually talk about compassion fatigue. And that basically is a definition of compassion. So is the burnout the same as compassion? No, burnout is a term used to describe a state of total exhaustion caused by work or project-related stress. It has profound physical, mental, and emotional consequences, same as compassion fatigue. But it's also known as vicarious trauma or secondary traumatic stress. It can actually lead to PTSD as well in some patients. But it's the emotional and physical exhaustion that can affect healthcare professionals and caregivers over time. The pressure of... Oh, sorry, I thought I speak loud enough actually. So not loud enough? All right, okay. Sorry, I have a tendency of not speaking behind podiums actually. I tend to walk around a little bit. Right? The pressure of caring for others can become overwhelming, especially since self-care often gets neglected. So burnout and compassion fatigue. 40% of Canadians report that they're in the advanced stages of burnout. 40% of Canadian nurses report burnout. 14% of general nurses have tested positive for symptoms of post-traumatic stress disorder. 1.5 times is more prevalent in terms of healthcare workers are more likely to be affected, more likely to be off work due to illness or disability than the people in all other sectors. So what is burnout? Burnout can lead to compassion fatigue. Burnout does not always lead to compassion fatigue. Burnout is a specific reaction to work-related stress. Compassion fatigue, on the other hand, occurs without being burnt out, and it's a reaction to emotional stress and vulnerability and a sense of futility. And this word futile is a very loaded word. I mean, and people kind of deal with futility in a lot of different ways. It depends on that person's personality. Some people deal with that sense of being unable to do things a little bit better than other people do, right? I'm one of those few people who actually cannot deal with futility very well, right? I tend to kind of work harder and harder to try and overcome that sense of futility, and that then leads to me kind of feeling burnt out to some extent, but trying to in some way kind of figure out a way around it. So how do you actually compare it? So the burnout is caused by occupational stress and overwork. It creates a work dissatisfaction, is linked to excessive pressure and leads to loss of motivation and energy. Whereas compassion fatigue, on the other hand, is caused by people who are suffering, creates life dissatisfaction, happens when people feel helpless, out of control, and leads to lack of empathy and PTSD-like symptoms. And I think this has already been talked about, so I'm not going to go through it, but it leads to a lot of emotional symptoms, including significant clinical anxiety and depression in people. So I'm going to talk a little bit about in brain injuries, because I don't think I have that much time. So compassion fatigue occurs in both staff and in caregivers or patients with brain injuries. Why? People with brain injuries are very complex, as I mentioned before. Why are they complex? I used to teach my residents and my fellows and everybody else, tell me in one word all of the problems that can happen in people with brain injuries. One word. Any idea? Everything or anything, right? So think about every mental health issue that you can think about, including personality disorders, including behavior disorders, including anxiety, depression, OCD, psychosis. All of that can happen in people with brain injuries. So you're dealing with very complex individuals, and you're dealing with very complex issues. So you need to try and understand the patient. And in trying to understand the patient, you have to build that relationship, like Dr. Piemonte was saying. But by building the relationship itself gets you involved in that patient's life, gets you enmeshed in that patient's life, and you're trying to figure out, how do I solve this problem with the brother, problem with the spouse, problem with the school, problem with this person's kind of having aggression and legal problems, because all of those need to be fixed, because now you're within the relationship setting. And so trying to kind of fix all of that leads to problems. And this becomes especially worse if you're dealing with complex caregiving roles. What happens if you're dealing with somebody who's aggressive? Somebody who's beating you up on a regular basis as a spouse? Somebody who's treating you with indifference? Somebody who's treating you with neglect? How does that person keep providing care to her husband day in, day out for years on end? Because you also realize brain injury doesn't have a finite end time. Brain injury is for the rest of the person's life. So if somebody has a brain injury at 25 years of age, and that's kind of roughly the incidence when most brain injuries happen, you're looking at another 50 to 60 years of patients actually having brain injury and symptoms. And you're looking at caregivers having 50 to 60 years of providing care for that patient. And in Canada, I don't know about the States, probably the same applies in the States, there isn't enough resources to actually manage all these patients. So there isn't housing. So somebody who's 25, the parents are kind of 45, they can manage a 25-year-old person who's got a bit of aggression. But now the patient is 50 and the caregivers are 80. How do they manage the same patient with aggression? Right? So it becomes their burnout and their fatigue becomes even more intense. And so that's the complex patients. And there are certain types of patients who even make it more difficult. Somebody who's apathetic, for example. Apathy means that you're sitting there and staring at the wall the whole day, doing nothing. Parents, spouses, anybody, the caregivers, get totally fed up with it because they try and say, what is this person doing? He's just sitting there looking at the wall. And that burns people out. That actually leads to a compassion fatigue I'm talking about. But I always tell my caregivers, you are more upset than the person is. He's quite happy sitting there looking at the wall. Why are you getting upset about about the fact that the person is sitting there looking at the wall? You need to accept that this is part of brain injury. This is an orbitofrontal disorder. It's certain areas of the brain, when it gets damaged, leads to this problem. You're not going to be able to change it regardless of how much you yell at that patient, right? So that then leads to this sense of futility in the caregivers, and that then leads to the compassion fatigue. So that, and also a lot of these patients, as I mentioned before, they need to kind of learn to live with little or no supports. So they're providing, as I said, aggressive patients. There's only very few places where we can actually have patients who are very aggressive, and one of them is Mind Forward. We have a unit it's called Williams House now. And we deal with severe behaviors, patients who are extremely aggressive, patients who can be violent. And it's a locked unit. But it only has 9 beds, right? There is probably kind of 3 times as many people who require that particular unit. And so that's the lack of supports that people have. So you're not trying to deal with an extremely aggressive patient or an extremely depressed patient or an extremely anxious person at home with practically no supports in place. And that then leads to a lot of the compassion fatigue that we're talking about. And it's also, as I mentioned, brain injury has indefinite timelines. There is no end in sight. Most of us can deal with something like our spouse breaks a leg. We know that for 12 weeks, that person is going to be disabled. We need to kind of work left, right, and center to try and provide that care. We need to lift that person. We need to do this, that, and everything else. But we know that in 12 weeks, the person is going to be back on their feet and they're going to kind of move ahead. And that knowledge that this person is going to be back to normal in 12 weeks keeps us going. We don't actually end up developing that compassion fatigue. But if you know that it's not going to be 12 weeks, but it's going to be 12 years, it's going to be 24 years, how do you keep going? That's where the problem comes in. So this indefinite timelines leads to that compassion fatigue as well, because you think and say, I have to do this for the rest of my life. Because my patient or my husband or my son or whoever is going to have the problem with the brain injury for the rest of their lives. Right? And that knowledge that you have to deal with this for indefinite time periods leads to this fatigue. Right? I'm going to stop there. I'm going to pass it to Mike Rogers to talk a little bit about what Mind Forward is trying to do to address all of this. Thank you.
I will use the podium, unlike Dr. Seyone. I'm not smart enough here to go without notes on this. How are we for time, out of curiosity? I had an entire interpretive dance that I think I'm going to have to cut out of the presentation, so I apologize. Let's just make sure all this is working. All right. Before I get into our model, first off, thank you, Diane and Gluckstein, for having us here. Pardon? 15. Okay, I can do the dance after all. That'll be later. That'll be later on. Anyways, I think all of us in this room could agree that there are gaps in the traditional models. And most of the systems were not designed with caregivers in mind. They're designed on the individual, not the dyad. They're reactive, time-limited, and they're educationally light. And sustainability is not inherently baked in. So Mind Forward has a stance, and we believe that caregiver well-being needs to be fundamental in design. So our position, we take 3 things that we're very strong at. We utilize neuropsychological insight and expertise, trauma-informed relationship-based delivery, and long-term community partnership and presence. Because we believe that caregiver well-being is a clinical and system outcome. And I'm going to say that a couple of different ways. Caregiver well-being needs to be, should be, has to be a clinical and system outcome. And when it is, we see better supports for client stability, it reduces crisis escalation, and it strengthens system flow. Because we know that when caregivers are in burnout, people end up in crisis. So what do we do about it? Well, at Mind Forward, we offer structured caregiver education. We focus on brain behavior education, behavior as communication, normalizing reactions, and neuroscience-informed strategies. Really what we want to try to do is help the individuals understand one of the most pressing questions that they have. Dr. Seyone probably gets it 100 times a day, and it's why? Why this behavior? Why this emotion? Why this apathy? We want to help them understand. Now, part of that education also includes behavioral consultation and coaching. We want to work on collaborative problem solving, de-escalation planning and proactive routines, environmental adaptations, and real situation coaching. And we really do emphasize on coaching over advising. We can hand out information pamphlets, but we really want to understand is, can they implement the information we're giving them? If they can't, it's not going to be helpful. So when we do all this, what changes? I can go back if I see people taking pictures. If you guys want slides, I can send them out. But when we're doing this, what changes when caregivers are supported? Well, we see an increase in resilience and regulation. We see an increase in relationship quality. We see a decrease in staff turnover. And most importantly, we see an increase to the quality of life for those being supported. And I think we all would agree that supporting caregivers creates a positive ripple effect across the entire system. Now, a few takeaways. I encourage you to think about integrating caregiver education as a standard component to anything that you're doing. And again, caregivers, the way that Mind Forward looks at it, is not siloed. Caregivers, there's everybody in this room, those caring for children, parents, those caring for clients. It's the entire spectrum. We want to offer consultation and coaching, not just information. We need to make sure that these individuals know how to implement the knowledge that we're trying to impart on them. We want to design for predictability and emotional sustainability. And most of all, we want to treat caregiver well-being as a measurable outcome. And with that, Hunter, I'm going to invite you up to close.
We're in the right spot.
I will add one more thing that we have done in Mind Forward. We have started a caregivers council. It was one thing that wasn't in place there, and we thought that we needed to give caregivers a voice. I will also admit it's working slowly. It's not working as fast as we would like it to happen, but it's part of what Mike has talked about. We've got to get in there and we've got to coach them a bit and get the outputs because we want the caregivers to have a voice at Mind Forward. In closing, I would like to draw your attention to this quote that we pulled. If we want sustainable care, we must design for the people who provide the care every day. Supporting the supporters is not optional, it's foundational. So, by designing systems with this in mind, the care will last longer, systems will work better, and outcomes will improve. Caregiving is an essential foundation upon which all sustainable care is built. Thank you.